My hands trembled as I watched her open our front door as if she owned the place. This woman had been making our lives miserable for months, and now she was brazenly stepping into our home. I couldn't fathom her nerve. But what came next? I wish I'd recorded her face when she rang those cops, convinced she'd finally ruined me. She had no clue what was about to happen. The moment they knocked and my wife answered, I watched 2 decades of smugness collapse in an instant. Sweet justice never tasted so good. Ever seen a bully get their comeuppance? Share your story in the comments. My father, Colonel James Bryant, passed away 28 years ago, and ever since I've kept up a little memorial garden for him. It's nothing grand, just carefully tended roses and lilies around a plain stone marquee, but it was his last wish. After years of Vietnam nightmares, tending that patch was his therapy, growing something beautiful out of all the ugly. So when I discovered those challenge coins placed with military precision among plants I'd cared for nearly 30 years, my first reaction wasn't thanks. It was alarm. Security cameras aren't something you expect in a quiet suburban street, but I installed one after some teenage trouble last month. The footage from 2 a.m. showed everything I needed to see and nothing I wanted to understand. A figure moving through my backyard with the exactitude of someone trained. Their movements were precise, their placements deliberate. The face was hidden under a hood and angled away from the lens, someone who knew how to avoid surveillance. This wasn't a neighbor coming to pay respects. This was someone with professional covert experience who knew intimate details about my father's service. Then Kimberly Hall decided to make her show. HOA president, immaculately dressed, striding across my lawn like she was inspecting a parade route. Mr. Bryant, I have an emergency health violation order for the unauthorized memorial structure in your yard, she declared, waving documents that looked official. What froze me wasn't the legal threat, it was what she said next. I understand your father served with the 1st Cavalry in Vietnam, at Firebase Charlie in 1968. My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand. Firebase Charlie wasn't in any public files. It was a classified mission that went wrong and cost lives, information that should have stayed buried with the men who were there. How on earth did an HOA president know about Firebase Charlie? I'd spent years trying to get those records declassified for family history, hitting dead ends at every government office. Yet here was this suburban woman dropping classified military details as casually as weather talk. She went on, the garden violates public safety due to improper soil conditions. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was thinking about government databases, who gets access to sealed military files, and why someone would reveal classified details just to threaten my father's memorial. The legal argument she presented was a bureaucratic masterpiece. My father filed a cemetery permit application back in 1985 after he bought the house. 36 years of processing delays, demands for more documentation. The sort of red tape that buries families who can't afford legal help. The garden existed in limbo, neither approved nor officially rejected. Perfect leverage for Kimberly. You have 30 days to remove the structure or face $15,000 in fines, she announced, smiling like she knew something I didn't. Then she said something that changed everything. Perhaps if you were willing to discuss what other family heirlooms might be stored in the basement of yours, we could find a more flexible solution. My basement, where I keep my father's Purple Heart collection, heirlooms passed down through 3 generations of service, locked in a safe known only to Rachel and me. Kimberly wasn't merely threatening the memorial garden, she was fishing for priceless military artifacts, items worth far more than any HOA paperwork could explain. That evening, I decided to find out exactly what was going on. I remembered that cemetery permit application. The county keeps digital records back to the 1970s, so I should have been able to pull the original filing. My computer was sluggish, probably overdue for an update, but I finally made it to the property records section. Everything looked normal at first. I found our address, clicked into historical documents, and there it was, a cemetery permit application filed October 15, 1985. As I read the details, my screen went completely black. Not sleep mode. Not a power flicker, totally black, like someone had reached through the internet and shut my machine off. When it rebooted a minute later, I went straight back to that page. The permit was gone, erased from the county database. Then I saw the deletion timestamp, The file had been removed while I was reading it at 30 seconds after I opened it. Someone had been watching my keystrokes in real time, waiting for me to access that exact document, and deleted it while I watched. I sat frozen, staring at the blank screen, my hands shaking. This wasn't petty-ho politics. This was a coordinated operation, real-time computer monitoring, access to government records, and intelligence about my family's military history going back decades. Whoever was behind this had serious resources, and they'd just shown they could manipulate official records to wipe evidence that might protect me. The mysterious backyard visitor, the classified military details, the live deletion of county files. These weren't random. Someone had been building this scheme for a long time and knew things about my family that should have been impossible to find. Who has access to classified Vietnam-era files, live surveillance capabilities, and the power to delete government documents while a citizen is reading them? And what could they possibly want from my family that justified using such sophisticated, risky tactics? At dawn, Janet Martinez called me, and I'd never heard fear like that in a person's voice. "Patrick, I can't talk on the phone. Coffee shop on 5th Street, 1 hour, bring nothing electronic." Click. Janet had been HOA secretary for 8 years and had seen every brand of neighborhood drama. If she sounded terrified, whatever she'd found went way beyond property line squabbles. I drove to the coffee shop wondering what could unsettle her so badly. She was already there, clutching a manila folder like it contained something explosive. Her hands trembled as she slid it across the table. "I copied these before I chickened out," she whispered. Kimberly had been running surveillance on veteran families for 6 months, Janet told me. Not just names and addresses, property surveys, inheritance records, detailed military service histories for every veteran in the neighborhood. I opened the folder and felt punched in the gut. Floor plans of my house with the basement dimensions circled in red. Photos of my backyard taken from multiple angles. A dossier on my father's service more detailed than anything I'd ever seen. The financial trail revealed the true scale. The HOA had been paying consulting fees to a company called Heritage Military Appraisals, $15,000 over 6 months, for services never explained to homeowners. Shipping invoices listed storage facilities in Nevada and Arizona with package weights matching military medals and artifacts. Someone was using our HOA dues to fund a systematic theft operation, targeting the families who paid those dues. "There's more," Janet said quietly. "Tom Wilson told me an appraiser contacted him offering $8,000 for his father's Bronze Star. The man knew details Tom had never shared." I went straight to Tom's house. What he described sounded like a scene from a spy thriller. The appraiser didn't just know the existence of the Bronze Star, he knew the specific battle where Tom's father earned it, the date, even the names of fellow soldiers. Information that should only exist in classified files or family lore. Tom refused the offer, but the shipping manifests Janet had copied told a darker story. Military artifacts leaving our zip code every few weeks, packages with weights that matched Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, unit citations. Return addresses were P.O. boxes. Tracking numbers led to auction houses across the country. Someone had built a pipeline to steal military artifacts from veteran families and sell them to collectors using the HOA as cover. Then I found the document that made my stomach drop. A shipping receipt dated yesterday showing a package sent from Tom Wilson's address to Heritage Collectibles in Las Vegas. A weight that matched 3 Bronze Stars or a Purple Heart. I called Tom. "Did you change your mind about selling those medals?" I asked. "Hell no," he said. "They're still in my bedroom safe where they've always been." There was a long silence before he said something that froze me. "Patrick, that's definitely my signature on that receipt, but I swear I never signed anything." Identity theft on a scale I'd never imagined. They weren't just targeting collections, they were forging signatures and shipping stolen items using victims' names as cover. The receipt had Tom's full legal signature, his correct address, even his phone number for delivery confirmation. But he'd never authorized anything, never dealt with the shipping company. Whoever did this had studied signatures well enough to produce convincing forgeries, then use them to move stolen goods across state lines. The sophistication was staggering. Database access to collect personal information, surveillance to catalog collections, forgery skills to create authentic-looking documents, and interstate shipping networks to move stolen items. This was organized crime masquerading as HOA business. They were so brazen they committed federal offenses using the victims' identities. I spent the afternoon checking with other veteran families. The pattern was chillingly precise. The Hendersons had supposedly sold their grandfather's World War II medals last month, but they'd never signed papers or received payment. The Kowalskis received a thank you note for donating their father's Vietnam memorabilia to a museum, a donation they never made. The Pattersons found their son's Bronze Star listed in an online auction with paperwork claiming they'd consigned it. Every targeted household was under financial strain: medical bills, job losses, kids heading to college. The criminals picked vulnerable families and timed offers to maximize pressure. When families were desperate, they accepted deals that looked generous. When they refused, the criminals forged the paperwork and took the items anyway. The cruelty was systematic: steal the symbols of service from those who sacrificed, then sell them to collectors unaware they were buying stolen honors. And the most terrifying part, the level of inside information suggested someone with official access to government databases, perhaps even cooperation from those meant to protect citizens. How else could they gather detailed service records, monitor finances, and track daily routines with such precision? Someone with legitimate access was feeding criminals the data they needed to ruin us. The trail led straight into systems that should have been protecting us, not helping thieves pinpoint vulnerable families and plan raids. The corruption wasn't limited to our HOA. It reached into government systems meant to safeguard veterans like ours. Driving home with Janet's folder on my lap, I realized this was far bigger than petty neighborhood crime. This was an organized assault on America's military heritage, corrupted officials and slick surveillance working together to steal the belongings that represent decades of sacrifice. Tomorrow I would have to convince neighbors that the woman they trusted to run the community was actually running a criminal enterprise that had been plundering them for months. Rachel got a call at dawn from Detective Mark Webb, and even in her pajamas she looked like she'd been punched. 20 years in law enforcement, 12 of them as a detective, and 3 months as our town's new police chief. She'd seen a lot, but when Webb told her our police database had been compromised, she went for her holster before she'd finished waking up. Someone's been systematically querying our veteran services records for weeks, he said. Purple Heart recipients, Bronze Star winners, families of the KIA. They're building target lists from our files. 20 minutes later Webb was at our table with printouts that made my skin crawl. The compromised credentials hadn't just exposed names and addresses. They'd pulled financial records, family status updates, even psychological evaluation reports for veterans in treatment. Everything a criminal organization would need to identify who was vulnerable and how to exploit them. This goes back 6 weeks, Webb said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. Whoever set this up knew exactly what to extract and how to do it without tripping alarms. The development company connections he'd found sketched out a criminal network spanning states, shell auction houses specializing in military memorabilia, corporate entities owning properties in our neighborhood. These weren't legitimate businesses. They were laundering stolen artifacts, creating fake paper trails to make the items look legitimate. A Purple Heart stolen from a family in Colorado would be consigned to an auction in Nevada, sold to a collector in Florida, then resold as a legitimate antique with fabricated provenance. The betrayal turned personal when we confronted Linda Carter about social media access. Our 60-something neighbor, the widow who organized block parties and dropped cookies off for newcomers, broke down when we showed her how she'd been manipulated. Kimberly had told her it was for a neighborhood safety app. Linda believed it would help protect everyone and handed over her account passwords. Through Linda's profiles, the criminals had been cataloging military displays visible from living room windows, flagging posts where relatives mentioned service, and tracking when families left town. Webb's review of similar cases nationwide painted a picture of industrial-scale theft operating under law enforcement's radar for years, a recurring pattern across a dozen states. And new HOA president with a tragic backstory, systematic targeting of veteran families, and large-scale disappearance of military collections. The development company links were eerily consistent, pointing to a coordinated national operation with deep intelligence gathering and corruption capabilities. The scope was staggering, But it was the personal threat that froze me. That afternoon Rachel's police-issued phone buzzed with an encrypted message that changed everything. Your husband took something that doesn't belong to him. Check your basement safe. We know the combination is your wedding date. You have 24 hours to return our property or join him in federal prison. The message had been sent from inside the police network. Someone with access to internal communications was monitoring our probe and issuing threats in real time. Rachel went pale. A mole inside her own department, an insider who'd been feeding information to the criminals. Every case she'd worked, every confidential file she'd filed, might have been compromised by someone on the payroll or seated at the next desk. The violation was both professional and personal. It smashed the trust she'd built her career on. Our basement safe became a symbol of how deeply they'd invaded our lives. We'd used our wedding date as the combination because it felt private and secure, a detail only we would know, yet the criminals referenced it like a known fact. They'd been watching us far longer than we realized, monitoring routines, collecting intimate details to weaponize against us. How many times had they observed us open that safe? What other private facts of ours had been harvested? Webb's ongoing investigation uncovered compromised employees at multiple levels. The records clerk David Parker was only the start. There were corrupted staff in the county assessor's office, infiltrators inside Veterans Affairs, and breaches across different police databases. This network hadn't just corrupted our local systems, it had spent years building influence and access inside institutions designed to protect veteran families. Their methods were cruelly surgical. This wasn't random theft. They profiled each household, emotional pressure points, financial strain, family tragedies, and tailored approaches to exploit those exact weaknesses. Veterans with PTSD received different pitches than grieving widows. Families with medical bills were targeted with cash offers. Those facing tuition deadlines were baited with quick money solutions. When families accepted out of need, the criminals legitimized the theft. When families refused, the criminals forged documents and stole the items anyway. Realizing my family had been handpicked and studied made everything darker. We weren't incidental victims. We'd been identified, monitored, and manipulated over months, maybe years. The hooded visitor at my father's memorial, Kimberly's thinly veiled threats, the deletion of official files, the forged shipping receipts, they were all threads of the same, carefully woven conspiracy. The knowledge of classified military records, the real-time manipulation of databases, these weren't coincidences. Someone had been orchestrating our downfall for a very long time. Have you ever felt like every move you make is under surveillance? That constant tension, where even a phone call feels dangerous. That sickening awareness that the very systems meant to protect you are now being weaponized against you. That was our reality. And it cut deeper because Rachel and I weren't just civilians, we were supposed to be protectors. Instead, we had become prey, hunted by a network that had infiltrated our work, corrupted our neighbors, and turned our community into a feeding ground for stolen military heritage. The message from inside the police station wasn't just intimidation, it was a declaration of war. Tomorrow, we would need to figure out how to fight enemies who anticipated our every move before we made it. The emergency home meeting was set for 7 p.m. and I prepared like I was planning a military briefing. After 3 weeks of digging, I had charts, shipping manifests, financial records, enough to expose the criminal network hiding in plain sight. The community center was packed tighter than I'd ever seen. Clearly, Kimberly had been working the crowd, painting me as some unhinged veteran obsessed with harassing innocent neighbors. The seating told the story. Her allies up front, veteran families scattered in the back, isolated and outnumbered, fellow residents. I began, steadying my voice. I have evidence proving that our HOA has been infiltrated by criminals systematically robbing veteran families. The room erupted in murmurs, but not the kind I'd hoped for. Kimberly's supporters exchanged smug glances, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Before I could even lay out my first piece of evidence, a sharp-suited lawyer I'd never seen before stood up. Mr. Bryant, that information was obtained through unauthorized access to confidential HOA files. Presenting it here is a criminal act, and it would be inadmissible in any court. Janet Martinez was dragged into the mess, forced to admit under oath that she'd shared those files. In real time, my case collapsed. The very evidence that proved the theft was dismissed as illegally obtained. Kimberly's smile said everything. She'd engineered the perfect legal trap. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we've endured," she announced sweetly. "Mr. Bryant has been breaking into offices, intimidating witnesses, harassing neighbors. This is not how civilized people resolve disputes." That night's media coverage was brutal. The local news ran with the headline, "Disturbed Veteran Attacks HOA President." A footage showing me waving documents while Kimberly looked calm and composed. Then came the interview that nearly broke me. "I feel threatened by his militant behavior," Kimberly said, dabbing at her eyes. "Of course veterans deserve respect, but when someone uses military training to intimidate civilians, we have to protect our neighborhoods. That mindset has no place here." I wanted to smash the television. That's when FBI agent Victoria Hayes entered our lives. She wasn't there for pleasantries. Professional, precise, briefcase in hand. She arrived the morning after my public humiliation. "Detective Webb contacted us," she said. "Your case matches a pattern we've been tracking across multiple states." Finally, someone was treating this as organized crime, not just HOA drama. Relief washed over me. Agent Hayes spread photos across our kitchen table. HOA operations in a dozen states, all identical to ours. "The development company runs shell auction houses across 6 states, she explained. "The system is simple. They identify veteran populations, infiltrate local governments, catalog valuable collections, then steal and launder through established channels." They had perfected their craft over years, refining methods, learning from each theft, becoming sharper, quieter, harder to trace. Our neighborhood wasn't special, it was just their latest target in a national campaign. The federal validation was empowering, but it painted a target on us. Hayes was blunt. "These people have compromised officials, penetrated government databases, threatened law enforcement. They've invested too much here to simply walk away. Expect escalation. Expect them to try to silence you." Walking to my car after that meeting, my head spun with federal jurisdiction, interstate trafficking charges, and the scope of the conspiracy. Then I noticed something under my windshield wiper, a purple heart. I picked it up with trembling hands. The engraving read, "For Valor, Colonel James Bryant, Vietnam, 1968. It was my father's missing medal, the one we'd assumed lost after his death, misplaced by the funeral home or accidentally discarded in the estate chaos. But here it was, warm from the afternoon sun. My father died in 1995, which meant someone had held on to this medal for 28 years, keeping it safe until now. Who does that? Who hides a dead man's Purple Heart for nearly 3 decades, only to return it at this exact moment? The timing wasn't coincidence. Someone was signaling me, reminding me that their connection to my family ran far deeper than this HOA scheme. The medal felt unbearably heavy in my palm, heavy with truths I wasn't ready to face. If these criminals had been circling us since 1995, then maybe my father's heart attack wasn't natural. Heart attacks can be induced, accidents can be staged, and military secrets the kind my father carried are worth killing to protect. Agent Hayes studied the medal with unnerving intensity. Agent Hayes studied the Purple Heart with the sharp eye of someone who knew both military protocol and the psychology of organized crime. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "We're not just looking at theft anymore. This network has ties going back decades, tied directly to your family. You weren't chosen at random. You're a target because of who your father was and what he may have known." Her words made the whole case spiral into something far bigger, far deadlier. That night, clutching my father's medal for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I realized the truth. This wasn't about HOA corruption or stolen artifacts anymore. This was a plan set in motion decades ago, built around my family, waiting for the right time to strike. The memorial garden, the classified details, the deliberate targeting, none of it was coincidence. These people thought in decades, not weeks. They'd waited 28 years to finish what began when my father died. The medal wasn't just sentimental, it was a message. But was it a warning, a threat, or an invitation to dig deeper into secrets buried with him? All I knew was that the next day would reveal things that could rewrite everything I thought I understood about my family's history, and I wasn't sure I was ready. At 6 a.m. Tuesday, an anonymous tip came through. Stolen military property at 1520 Oak Street. Check the basement. Rachel had no choice. A protocol demanded she follow up, even if she knew it reeked of a setup. If she ignored it, her credibility would collapse, and the federal case would be compromised. The irony was brutal. My own wife was forced to lead a search of our home, knowing full well the evidence would almost certainly be planted by the same criminals we were hunting. I'll never forget the look on her face as she marched the search team through our front door, her expression professional, her eyes screaming with pain. The warrant was airtight, crafted with surgical precision to maximize humiliation. Media crews were already outside before the search began, tipped off and ready to capture the spectacle, the disgraced veteran's house being raided. And then came the discovery: Purple Hearts, bronze stars, carefully tucked into our basement storage, none of them mine, none belonging to my family, each one stolen from veteran families I'd never even met. The paperwork was damning. Authentication documents tied each medal to a real family in another state. The Kowalski family's Weill heirlooms, the Hendersons' Vietnam decorations, the Martinez family's South Korean War relics, all supposedly in my possession. By evening, the headlines were everywhere: local veteran arrested in military medal theft ring. The footage was a masterpiece of manipulation. Amy in handcuffs, medals being bagged up, Rachel forced to walk beside me as though I were just another criminal. Kimberly's interview sealed the narrative. I feared something was wrong when Mr. Bryant grew so defensive about his basement, she said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. Sadly, the investigation revealed he'd been stealing from veteran families across multiple counties. It breaks my heart to see someone dishonor the military community like this. Watching Rachel read me my rights was torture. Her voice cracked when she said, "You have the right to remain silent." 20 years of marriage, and she was forced to treat her husband like a suspect. The criminals had used her integrity as their sharpest weapon, forcing her to choose between her oath and her family. FBI agent Hayes, however, saw through it instantly. She'd seen this exact playbook in at least 3 other states. The strategy never changed: plant evidence, manipulate the press, destroy credibility. The goal wasn't just to silence the whistleblower, it was to make the entire veteran community look corrupt. "They're not only trying to stop you," Hayes said during my federal interrogation. "They're trying to poison the well. If they can discredit you, they discourage every other veteran from coming forward. It's psychological warfare." My only option was cooperation, help the feds expose the trafficking network in exchange for protection, possibly even witness relocation. The alternative was trial, where the mountain of fabricated evidence and media hysteria guaranteed conviction. But taking the deal meant painting a target on my back. And Rachel's 48 hours in federal custody gave me time to see the strategy clearly. They weren't just attacking me, they were isolating me. By branding me a thief, they ensured every veteran family around me doubted my word, suspected I'd stolen from them personally. Why would anyone rally behind me now? When I finally walked out, wearing a federal monitoring device for protection, our neighborhood felt like enemy territory. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. Curtains twitched as neighbors whispered. The device around my ankle was both shield and shackle, a protection, but also a daily reminder that I was a prisoner in my own community. And then came the final blow. I returned home to find my father's memorial garden desecrated, every flower ripped from the ground, the stone marker shattered into rubble, the soil scattered like a battlefield. But it was the note pinned to the oak tree that froze my blood. "Your father was a coward who got good men killed. Ask your mysterious visitor about Firebass Charlie." November 1968. Some secrets are worth killing for. The destruction itself was gutting, but the note revealed something much darker. Firebass Charlie, a classified operation from my father's service, sealed in military archives for decades. Someone knew details only available to those who were there or who had access to the deepest files. This wasn't just about stolen medals or HOA corruption. This was tied to military secrets over half a century old, secrets people were still willing to kill for. Agent Hayes photographed the wreckage, her face grim. "Patrick," she said, voice low, "we've crossed into national security territory." Agent Hayes's voice carried a weight that froze me. "This changes everything. We're not just dealing with criminals anymore. This goes back to classified military operations and government cover-ups that span decades. Your family isn't random collateral. You're being erased because of what your father knew about Firebus Charlie, and what he might have told you before he died. The destruction of the memorial garden suddenly made sense. It wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a message. Proof that whoever orchestrated this had been tracking my family since Vietnam, patient enough to wait decades, waiting for the right moment to settle scores and bury secrets. My father's death in 1995 no longer looked like natural causes. It began to feel like the first step in a long sequence of accidents designed to clean up anyone connected to Firebus Charlie, and I realized, with a cold certainty, that I might be next. The note had shifted the battlefield. This wasn't about stolen medals or money anymore. This was about silencing witnesses to something that happened in November 1968. Something worth shattering families and corrupting entire government systems to keep hidden. And tomorrow, I would start uncovering exactly what my father had died trying to protect. The federal investigation revealed a conspiracy so vast it redefined organized crime in the modern age. More than $50 million in documented stolen military artifacts. Networks spanning 18 countries. Corruption threading through 12 government agencies across 7 states. But what made this operation terrifying wasn't just the money or the reach, it was the precision. The use of advanced technology and psychological manipulation to target families like mine with surgical accuracy. Agent Hayes laid out the financial evidence. American military heritage wasn't just being stolen, it was being harvested, funneled into international markets where collectors treated it as priceless memorabilia. Countries like Germany, Japan, and Australia paid top dollar for authentic American history, not knowing, or perhaps not caring, that their treasures had been ripped from widows, children, and veterans who'd already given too much. Kimberly Hall's recruitment was a case study in weaponized grief. Federal files showed the criminals had marked her less than 2 years after her husband's death. Vulnerable, angry, financially strained. She was perfect. They studied her, profiled her, and approached at the exact moment she was most likely to bite. They twisted her pain into a weapon, convincing her she was striking back at the system that had abandoned her family. In reality, she was just another pawn, used to help an international crime syndicate profit off stolen valor. The depth of corruption still stunned even the federal task force. David Parker, the county clerk, was only one piece of a sprawling infection. Compromised employees sat inside 12 different agencies across 7 states. Police databases had been bleeding for over 2 years, with criminals quietly harvesting records on veterans' families and their finances, their struggles, the locations of heirlooms worth fortunes on the black market. Every time a veteran filed for benefits or updated paperwork, it wasn't just bureaucracy. It was data being siphoned to predators, used to plan thefts with chilling efficiency. From protective custody, I began working directly with federal agents. My military knowledge became a key weapon. I could trace stolen artifacts, analyze authentication methods, and break down how these criminals turned medals into merchandise. It was soul-crushing work, watching Purple Hearts stolen from grieving families pass through black market networks, ending up in the hands of collectors who believed they were buying history, not betrayal. The scale was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic looting, it was a full supply chain, from identification to theft, from forged authentication to international shipping. The criminals had perfected a system that turned military sacrifice into profit. And then came the footage that changed everything. Surveillance recordings from Arlington National Cemetery. Agent Hayes had been combing through military installation cameras when she uncovered a piece of evidence that shattered our understanding of Kimberly's true role. Agent Hayes had been combing through surveillance, searching for patterns that might expose the network's hierarchy. What she found changed everything. Clear footage showed Kimberly Hall standing at a grave marker. Robert Hall, Vietnam veteran, 1947–2018. The discovery detonated every assumption we had about her. Kimberly's carefully spun story as civilian husband, denied benefits, left unprotected by a system that only looked after veterans, was a fabrication. Her husband hadn't been a forgotten civilian, he had been one of us, a veteran. But not just any veteran. The deeper the federal team dug, the darker the truth became. Robert Hall hadn't simply served his service had ended in disgrace, possibly a court-martial, perhaps a dishonorable discharge. The network had leveraged Kimberly's bitterness, promising revenge against the same military establishment that had broken her husband's life. The investigation into Robert's record connected threads that chilled me. He had been in Vietnam at the same time as my father, and worse, his unit might have been tied directly to Firebush Charlie. The targeting wasn't random. These weren't scattered victims. The network had been zeroing in on families linked to a single classified operation. Firebush Charlie. November 1968. Hayes slid classified documents across the table, and I read truths I wasn't ready for. Covert missions buried in black ink, soldiers betrayed by command, cover-ups that destroyed careers to protect higher ranks. My father's name appeared. So did Robert Hall's, and at least 12 other veterans, all now dead, disgraced, or under attack. This wasn't just about stolen medals. It was an international crime syndicate being used to erase witnesses, burying Vietnam's dirtiest secrets under layers of theft, manipulation, and murder. The patterns were undeniable. Every family targeted had ties to Firebush Charlie. Veterans involved in classified operations that had gone catastrophically wrong. Families who might, through inheritance or memory, hold fragments of what really happened that November. The thefts were camouflage. The real mission was elimination. What terrified Hayes most wasn't just the killings, it was the how, the access, the manipulation of records, the real-time monitoring, the power to rewrite official files. This wasn't just local corruption, it was infiltration at the intelligence community level. Someone with access to government databases and clearance far above county clerks was orchestrating this cleanup. Robert Hall's dishonorable discharge was the key. Federal analysts began to suspect it tied directly to Firebush Charlie, at the same mission that had haunted my father until the day he died. Kimberly hadn't just been motivated by grief, she had been weaponized. Her husband's ruined career was the bait that pulled her into a conspiracy far larger than she ever understood. And suddenly, my father's death no longer looked natural. The timing, the secrecy, the note on the oak tree, everything screamed of orchestration, not fate. The network was patient, decades patient. They had silenced my father when he became a liability. Then they waited nearly 30 years until I inherited enough fragments of truth to become dangerous myself. Tomorrow, I realized, might not come. 3 days after I signed my federal cooperation agreement, Kimberly Hall finally made a mistake that unraveled her empire. Surveillance teams had been watching her crack. The arrests of her partners, the seizures of stolen artifacts, the collapse of international buyers, it all pushed her to desperation. And desperation makes criminals sloppy. At 9:30 a.m., she walked straight into her own destruction. She strode across our front yard, leather bag in hand, no attempt at subtlety. Her eyes carried the wild certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose. Within 2 minutes, her practiced hands worked the lock and she slipped inside. Thermal imaging tracked her movements as she cut a straight path to the basement, bypassing every room where a normal burglar might look for valuables. She knew where the evidence was supposed to be. Her confidence bordered on arrogance. She even called police dispatch from inside, pretending to report suspicious activity during routine evidence collection, establishing her alibi before she planted her trap. But arrogance is fragile. When she swung open the basement door, expecting an unguarded safe, she froze. Because instead of a vulnerable house, she walked into a federal sting. Floodlights snapped on, cameras rolled, a full surveillance team waited, weapons ready but not raised. At the center stood Chief Rachel Bryant in full dress uniform A&M, sitting calmly at a table stacked high with evidence files that traced her crimes across 18 countries. The look on Kimberly's face was priceless. Shock, disbelief. Then, as the truth settled in, the brittle collapse of her entire persona. For a heartbeat, the polished HOA president mask shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered criminal beneath. "What a broken bar, how did you she stammered, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The recording equipment caught every word, every tremor, every second of her downfall. Agent Hayes stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the light, her smile sharper than steel. "Miss Hall," she said, her voice steady with satisfaction, "You're under arrest for conspiracy." Agent Hayes's voice was calm but razor-sharp as she listed the charges: trafficking in stolen military artifacts, breaking and entering, wire fraud, and about 20 other federal crimes we've been documenting against you. In that instant, the truth about Rachel's role came into focus. All those sleepless nights I'd thought she was putting her badge before her family. I'd been wrong. She had been walking a razor's edge, protecting both our marriage and her career, while quietly coordinating with federal authorities to build a case so airtight it couldn't be broken. Every one of Kimberly's break-ins over the last 6 months, every artifact she planted, every threat she whispered, all of it had been captured through federal warrants. And now, this final attempt at her arrogance on full display was being recorded in real time. The nail in her own coffin. The case had been methodically assembled with perfect legal precision. No loopholes, no technicalities, no chance of dismissal. Outside, cameras rolled once again, but this time, not because of her manipulative tips to the media. Federal agents had invited the press to witness the moment of reckoning, to restore dignity to the veterans and families she had exploited. For the neighborhood, it was a reversal of power unlike anything they'd imagined. Their self-proclaimed protector, their hero president, was being unmasked as the mastermind of an international trafficking operation. The psychological blow would be devastating to her supporters, but healing for those she had tormented. Yet even cornered, Kimberly wasn't finished. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists and Hayes began reading her rights, she turned her eyes to me. Fury burned in them, but beneath it was something colder: a calculation. "You still don't know who your father really was, do you?" she hissed, her voice low but perfectly clear for the surveillance mix. "Ask Bill Thompson about the night your father died." November 15, 1995. A broken bar wasn't a heart attack. The room froze. Hayes stopped mid-sentence. My stomach turned to stone. That detail had the exact date, the exact cause of death. Was buried in classified intelligence files. Not something a suburban HOA president should ever know. Kimberly's words meant only one thing. Someone in the shadows of government had given her access. Or worse, someone had been there. This wasn't just a trafficking case. It wasn't even about stolen metals anymore. It was a murder. My father's a murder, and Firebass Charlie was at the rotten core. Hayes' tone changed instantly. She ordered more agents inside, called in military intelligence, and had Kimberly's possessions seized for classified review. The arrest had gone from organized crime to a potential espionage crisis. If Kimberly had access to military death records and covert operations from nearly 3 decades ago, the infiltration ran far deeper than anyone had feared. The network's true mission came into focus. The artifact smuggling had been a cover, a smokescreen. Their real objective was eliminating witnesses to Vietnam-era operations, scrubbing the record clean, one family at a time. As Kimberly was escorted into a federal transport van, she kept her gaze locked on me through the glass. The look in her eyes was chilling. Not defeat, not fear, a promise. This wasn't over. I knew she was right. The neighbors lining the street wore faces of shock and shame. Many had believed her lies, had judged me, whispered about me, turned their backs. Now they saw the truth with their own eyes. Their HOA president in handcuffs, exposed as the criminal she really was. Vindication washed over me like fire through ice. But beneath it was the darker truth. This battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. 2 years later, I stand on that same ground where my father's modest memorial garden once grew. Only now it has become something far greater. At the Patrick Bryant Veterans Memorial Park, children run through rows of artifact displays, laughing in the autumn air. 3 acres of land now honor veterans across states, showcasing medals and honors recovered from the trafficking ring that once tried to erase them. Families who lost pieces of their history now see them restored under the open sky. And every time I walk those paths, I think of the irony. Kimberly Hall tried to destroy my father's simple garden, but in doing so, she lit the fire that built something larger than either of us could have imagined. The justice system finally did what it was meant to do. Kimberly Hall now sits in a federal maximum security facility, serving a 15-year sentence for conspiracy, trafficking, racketeering, wire fraud, and violations of national security statutes. The development company behind her operations was dismantled piece by piece, with its executives sentenced to anywhere between 8 and 25 years. Even the corruption that had seeped into government offices was rooted out. From County Clerk David Parker's falsified records to the compromised police databases that had fed information to criminals for years. What once looked like an untouchable network 2 years ago was completely obliterated through patient, methodical federal investigation. The community, scarred by betrayal, began to transform. Linda Carter, who had been manipulated into giving up social media access, dedicated her life to turning guilt into purpose. She now manages the Memorial Park full-time, teaching communities across the country how to recognize manipulation tactics before it's too late. Her advocacy has become a lifeline for vulnerable veteran families and elderly residents often targeted for exploitation. Janet Martinez was honored statewide for her courage in exposing HOA corruption. Today, she works directly with federal agencies to detect and dismantle similar operations before they take root. The case even left a legislative legacy. The Patrick Bryant Protection Act introduced sweeping new protections for veteran families. It mandated oversight of HOA leadership in veteran-heavy communities, required federal background checks for those positions, and created automatic investigations whenever suspicious financial activity surfaced. Detective Webb rose to become a federal task force coordinator, developing training programs that help local police spot military artifact trafficking before it escalates. Rachel's career also flourished as she now directs a federal task force focused on protecting veteran families. She coordinates internationally to prevent artifact smuggling, with her training programs reaching law enforcement agencies in 42 states. The case that almost ended her career instead cemented her as a nationally recognized expert in shielding vulnerable military communities. And then there was the mystery of the memorial visitor. William Bill Thompson, at 78 and battling dementia, had been quietly visiting my father's memorial every month for 2 decades. He and my father had served together at Firebase Charlie in 1968. The truth he carried was heavier than I ever imagined. My father, Colonel James Bryant, had not died of a heart attack in 1995. He was murdered while investigating a smuggling operation rooted in Vietnam-era corruption. Firebase Charlie had uncovered proof that American military supplies were being fueled to black markets, some even reaching enemy hands. My father and Bill had worked on a classified inquiry into U.S. soldiers profiting from these schemes, but the investigation was buried, evidence locked away, and guilty soldiers quietly reassigned. Many of those men later built the international network that would one day target my family. My father's death was no accident. He had been silenced to stop him from exposing the continuation of those crimes. Bill's monthly visits were his way of protecting me, of honoring a fallen brother while keeping dangerous secrets locked away. Even as his memory faded, the instinct to honor my father remained. The international recovery effort that followed has been staggering. Federal agents retrieved more than 12,000 stolen artifacts from 18 countries. Many collectors had no idea the medals and honors they'd purchased were stolen from grieving families. Through diplomacy and education, international auction houses agreed to prevent trafficking from ever happening again. Financial restitution reached over $70 million. Money that was either returned to families or donated to veteran support groups. The annual memorial service has now become a national tradition. Families gather to celebrate their heritage, united by stories of survival and justice. Bill, despite his dementia, attends as the guest of honor each year, placing flags with the same steady hands that once carried him through battle. His presence is a reminder of loyalty, sacrifice, and bonds that survive even the cruelty of time. Children run through the memorial park, learning history through the very artifacts criminals once tried to sell off. Safeguards a federal oversight of sales, strict HOA leadership checks, and international agreements ensure that what happened here cannot be repeated. The so-called unstoppable network was undone not by wealth or power, but by the persistence of veterans, families, investigators, and communities refusing to be silenced. But even as justice settled in, the fight wasn't over. At the close of this year's memorial service, as families lingered among the displays, my phone rang. "Mr. Bryant," the caller said, her voice formal yet urgent. "This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Pentagon Historical Division. We need to talk about your father's final mission and the people who killed him. Based on new intelligence, we believe they're planning something much bigger than stealing metals, and you may be the key to stopping them." The journey that began with anonymous flowers on a memorial had unearthed corruption spanning 5 decades, crimes that crossed oceans, and secrets so dangerous that men had killed to keep them buried. But it had also revealed something stronger: the resilience of veteran families, the integrity of federal agents, and the strength of communities that refuse to bow to corruption. Looking back, I realized just how much can change when ordinary people stand up against systematic exploitation. Kimberly Hall believed she could manipulate us, rob us, and bury our history. Instead, she gave rise to a legacy more powerful than her schemes: a united community, determined to protect the truth. Colonel Mitchell's call was a reminder that the battle for justice never truly ends. Freedom demands vigilance, generation after generation. But it also reminded me of something far greater. We are not alone. Others stand ready to fight, to protect, to ensure that our heritage can never again be sold to the highest bidder. And that truth gives me hope for whatever comes next. That's the story of how a so-called HOA Karen's arrogance led to the fall of an international criminal empire. Here at Anna Drama Nest, we believe that the most extraordinary stories often come from the most unexpected places. If this tale of justice and resilience moved you, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned. Until next time, remember, even the quietest voice can rise above the noise when it speaks the truth.